My name's Tom DiNanno. I was the acting assistant secretary of state for the Arms Control Verification and Compliance Bureau, which was essentially the WMD directorate inside the State Department. And we monitored adversary nations' WMD programs, Russia, China, Iran, Syria, North Korea, on a full-time basis. We've got over 100 federal employees, contractors, and lab technicians, experts, PhD scientists that follow, again, adversary weapons programs, chemical, biological, nuclear. The U.S. government's on record for several years now, tracking, identifying, calling out Chinese biological weapons programs. So it's not new. We track it. We publicly, in reports and also verbally through Demarche to our allies, call out those weapons programs. So we know they have an active program, and we knew that the time would come in our typical schedule of looking at. There's a process inside the government by which we assess. Other agencies come to us with recommendations, with analysis, and essentially, I make the recommendation to the Secretary of State as to who's in compliance and what programs we may not have questions about. When the time came for us to go through our process, we acquired all the open source and classified data that we would need to make a recommendation as to whether or not they were in compliance with the PWC. We never reached a determination as to whether or not that actual virus was a bioweapon, but it did lead to revelations that have since become public through a fact sheet that was released in January 2021 by the at the end of the Trump administration, and also not refuted by the Biden administration, that we had serious questions about the links to the PLA, to the gain of function research that was going on at the WIV, and that was spelled out in some detail and went through a great amount of scrutiny inside the government from both our agency, intel agencies, to make sure that statement was accurate. But we never came to a conclusive determination whether or not it was part of the weapons program. We had begun to see evidence in the classified information, and also there was some open source information that began to trickle out. Some stories had been written in the press, and again, we follow open source and classified to get a full information pick. But it was the classified information that that I found particularly compelling, that really set off alarm bells, and there were tremendous discrepancies in the and inconsistencies of what I was being told. And it was simply a matter of one person saying X and another person or agency saying Y, and we wanted to drill down on that discrepancy and figure out why. And I think that was probably the can of worms that we weren't warned about, because it made people very uncomfortable when 2 or 3 different agencies had different opinions. And again, that was our role. That was my statutory role, to drill down on these questions, to give advice to the Secretary of State. And again, I knew he had interest in it. And we were keenly aware, once we began to see the discrepancies in information, and again, that warning per se, if it was such a thing, only gave me additional incentive to pursue the truth. The information that we released in the fact sheet lays out a series of circumstances that warrant additional questions. What I know the truth is that there was tremendous amount of inconsistency inside the intelligence community, inside the policy community, and that's true. That's not disputable. And those agencies have since gone public with their opinions that they believe SARS-CoV-2 was a non-natural occurrence. And so at the time, again, this is mid 2020, late 2020. These were unclassified channels, and we just had diametrically opposed opinions um, on on the source of the outbreak. But I do know that what I saw and what I viewed as information took a long time to come to light. And if it wasn't for the Secretary of State personally intervening with the Director of National Intelligence, I don't think it ever would have. And I think that was a unique case. I was at a fairly senior level of the department. I think probably others across other agencies that might not have been at that level, maybe into the mid-level scientists or analysts, probably came to the same conclusions, and that those recommendations never made it out of their agencies, whether that's for bureaucratic reasons, uh, for I don't know. I can't speak to their rationale, but I can tell you that there was a clear discrepancy and in what different agencies were saying, and when we began to pull at those strings, people became very uncomfortable with the level of questioning um, and hesitant to share information, complete information pictures, which I only knew after I left the government um, that what had transpired. When I uh, began to see the classified information that told me that, I had no opinion. It's not my job to have an opinion. My job is to ascertain the facts, to gather information from the intelligence community and make a recommendation to the Secretary of State of uh, what we thought the information could support. So again, the opinions were in the reporting, and they were clear. These were agency reports. These are not um, uh, intercepts or fragments of information or uh, whisper liaison reports. These are reports from federal agencies that very clearly question the origin of the virus. And um, again, my opinion didn't matter. Um, but what matters is that opinion was heard, and that opinion made others very uncomfortable. Uh, and again, we had in the black and white. I had the report in my hand. It was almost impossible to refute unless the science was wrong. And and the science that was presented to me and to my leadership was from the top scientists in the United States government. And um, I'll stand by that. I think the original reporting is still classified. My speculation doesn't really matter. Um, but again, this was very clear to me that experts in the government had determined that there were serious questions about the origin of the virus. These are now been splayed all over the internet. There's been a lot of debate back and forth, and actually, not sure the science debate is really the issue to have. The issue that we need to talk about is what have we done to prevent uh, either the next one or to the next pandemic? What's changed that even the plausibility, which doesn't seem to be a lot of debate these days, of a lab release would set off alarm bells in a series of actions that one would think uh, that the government would take. But what's really shocking to me is that nothing's changed. That there's been um, a denial that unless something is forensically proven by what body I don't know, that we can't take any action as the government, and that's lunacy. I mean, after 9/11, we turned the government on our head, um, know, both domestically and overseas, and we're still living with the ramifications of that. Um, and for better or for worse, um, because of that terrorist attack. 3,000 Americans died. It was a failure of intelligence, and here we are, 3 4 years now after 2020, that fall of 2020 when I was involved with this, and nothing's changed. Um, so if you don't acknowledge the problem or the potential of the problem, you can't change it. So to insist that it didn't happen is uh, is really shocking to me. So rather than raising the bar of forensic proof, um, we should we have enough information to make smart policy decisions, and I don't think that's in dispute. But we've chosen not to make any policy changes. I don't know why. I don't understand the politics of it, but it seems to be that one side seems to be went to one view and one side to the other, and we've made no meaningful public policy changes to prevent another pandemic. I mean, at the core of it, if China is our adversary, again, I sat through daily pouring through intelligence reports of Chinese weapons programs, chemical weapons programs, biological weapons programs, nuclear programs, their conventional forces. This is now openly not debatable. I'm not sure they're the partner of choice for public health. If you choose to partner with China, um, bad things could happen. We didn't partner with the Russians in the 80s and 90s. I'm old enough to remember that on their WMD programs. I think we should maybe learn from that. I mean, it's so obvious, it's such common sense to me, but others uh, don't share that view. Apparently, the challenge of the of a weapons program per se is that they're dual use, is that they may masquerade or uh, uh, ostensibly be civilian. SARS-CoV-2 was relatively non-lethal. I think when you start getting into more lethal pathogens, keep hearing about Nipah virus and experts that I know in the field, uh, you're really playing with fire here. Um, so that Nipah has a much, I want to say 10 or 20% potential fatality rate. That's a serious catastrophe for mankind. Much smarter people than me uh, have uh, have talked about this, talked about it publicly, and I'm very concerned about it. Again, if your partner of choice cannot be your adversary, um, that we know has a history of problems. We need is enough information to make smart decisions, and I think we have that. Um, if we could just assume for a moment that there were two plausible scenarios, one is zoonotic, right, the market theory, and the other is a lab release. Look, after 9/11, I was in the Bush White House, and we created, after the Twin Towers came down, we went through a process and created 8 scenarios that we felt we should plan against in a for that potential terrorist attack. These never happened. There was no direct threat, yet we put thousands of people, man hours, millions of dollars, a national effort to ensure that they didn't happen. So we were planning for contingencies. So if we have these two contingencies, lab leak and zoonosis, then we should deal with them both. We can deal with both problems, but we've not done that. We've decided that we have to decide which one's right first to make smart recommendations. Lab leaks bad, a zoonosis, a market scenario is bad. If both are bad, we should do something for both scenarios. Both have happened in history, yet we seem incapable of doing two things at once here. Again, with all the information we need to make smart decisions. Of course, if it was a weaponized program, the geopolitical implications are severe, catastrophic. But both scenarios are bad. And if you have a weapons program, it's probably not advisable to just assume that there's a different floor at the WIV for the civilian research. But on the 5th floor is the weapons program, but on the 3rd floor is the civilian program. I mean, it just makes no sense that if you have a biological weapons program, why would you choose them? Choose that nation or any nation as a partner of choice, right? It's like partnering with the Syrians for for, you know, on a new chemical, new chlorine plants, right? It's crazy. You never do it. And if there's a compelling reason, let's hear it. Again, if research with China can help us cure cancer, then okay, show me it. But I don't think so.